that's just a normal turn of phrase.
Exactly.
Okay.
But if you make up your own metaphors and similes on the spot, then that's considered really speaking the language Texan well.
And who have you known that has done this particularly well?
I've known a lot of politicians who could do it. The late Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock was once trying to explain to me why he had taken a dislike to this reporter from the Washington Post. He said, Molly, he was a fancy city fellow. His pants were so tight, if he'd have farted, it would have blown his boots off. Now that's
a very colorful
a good use
descriptor.
of language.
Do you think this sort of speech is a sign of intelligence?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The ability to make
I think we all used to be in this country better storytellers than we are, and to cherish language more. Now, it's still in certain professions, trial lawyers, legislators, because they stand up and blow off a lot. But it's because most of us used to come from a rural background, and what you need for stories more than anything else is time. Sitting on the front porch shelling peas, listening to your aunts and your grandmas and your grandpa tell stories. And it takes time to tell a good story. I mean, you got to go down a couple of rabbit trails. If your Aunt Maud's name should come up, you will naturally recall the funniest thing Aunt Maud ever said. What has happened now, I think, is that we have a more quicker and I think more unkind form of urban humor. One-liners, very fast. People in cities are very busy. They don't have time to listen to long stories. And it often tends to be in sort of the form of put-downs.
So it's not particularly witty.
Well, I refer to it, it can be quite funny, but it's sort of Woody Allen humor.
Okay. Nasty?
Well, sarcasm and irony can be easily overused. I often say that my only criticism of the Lord God Almighty is that he's a little heavy on the irony.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. You actually, from what I read, knew George W. Bush in high school.
I did, and I didn't know him well, and I don't claim to have been a friend of his, but he hung out with people I knew and dated girls I knew, and I've just sort of always known him to say hi to.
So did you see germs of the present man in the, I guess, teenager that you knew then?
No, he was considered quite affable. You saw that, the affability was there. And then beyond that, a bit of a jerk, you know, a sort of rich
Of course, many of
boy.
us were jerks in high school.
Well, almost
right.
without exception.
Without we can't hold that against
Right.
Have you been taken to task for being a bit harsh in your tone in this book, Bushwhacked? I mean, you are critical of George Bush and his policies.
We're telling stories in this book. We're telling stories about real people.
Okay.
And it's just, we went out to look at, you know, okay, they changed this policy. How did that affect someone real? And you take the policy out to the people, and sometimes you just wind up with amazing stuff.
And so it's what you turned up.
Yeah.
Yeah. You seem to have a real feeling for the common man and woman. I mean, that's what the book is based on.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you understand politics as being often driven by greed and selfishness. I wonder how you connect those two things in the sense that, what's your view of human nature? At what point do you feel that people become selfish and greedy? Is that inherent in your view, or is that something that happens to them because of various forces in their life?
Sometimes conservatives seem to think that we liberals are far too prone to a benign view of human nature, and that we really don't credit the fact that some people are just evil. We've had this argument again since September 11th on numerous occasions. I remember once talking to an old ranger out in West Texas who said to me about politics, You know, I just feel like I'm about equal parts good and bad. There's just nobody appealing to the good in me. Now, I think that sometimes I look at the human race and I think, well, I think we're in a race against ourselves. So much of what man does is constructive and curing diseases and relieving misery and building great enterprises. On the other hand, there's the destructive, you know, greed and overrunning the world's resource like a berserk horde of locusts. And I sometimes I wonder which half of us is going to win. I don't think that people are naturally good. On the other hand, I think that if you raise a child with, you know, food, shelter, clothing, and love, the results are almost always better than if you don't. And I think that human goodness flourishes in certain conditions, and so we try to create those conditions.
Texas has a strong conservative and authoritarian ethic to the state. At the same time, it has a feisty and rebellious side.
Right.
You certainly encompass the feisty and rebellious.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile those two? I mean, is there a kind of a schizophrenia to the state in your view? How do you reconcile
that? I think that my politics and to a large extent my persona, there's an extent to which one plays the professional Texan.
Do you do it willingly, or are you obliged now to do it?
It's a habit now, and also it's such an easy thing to do, because if you really talk like a Texan and make observations like that, people assume that you're dumb, and that's a great advantage.
I can't imagine anyone has ever assumed that you're dumb.
It used to be when you went east in the 1960s, certainly, which I did and which George W. Bush did. Texans were considered barbarians as well, and this was true of Southerners generally were considered dumb. But you remember, every World War II buddy movie ever made, there's three guys. There's the clean-cut blonde hero from Kansas. There's the sharp, wise-cracking ethnic guy from New York City. And there's some slope-browed ridge runner from the South, just too dumb to tell, come on from Sikkim.
I read that you were once banned from the campus of Texas A&M University.
And it's
Tell us what happened.
Well, it's one of those stories where the punchline is much better than the story. Some kids were trying to test a campus rule, poor A&M, always stuck in the 50s. That said you could not have a political speaker on campus, and the administration had already had John Tower and some other very prominent right-winger on campus that year. So to test the rule, they were looking for somebody of a liberal persuasion, and we're not that easy to come by in Texas. By the time they got to me, I was like 99th and last on their list. They only wanted to take them up on it. And the administration actually started to take out an injunction to prevent me from speaking on campus, which would have been a wonderful First Amendment case. But alas, somebody noticed that you might put them in an awkward position. So they basically said to these kids, you know, if you don't move this off campus, we're going to yank your student charter and do all kinds of terrible things to you. So we moved it across the street to the Methodist Student Center, where I did my dead level best to incite a riot. But alas, the 7 people who turned out to hear me just clapped politely when I got through, and we all went out for a beer.
Okay. Molly, what do you believe to be your most important mission as a journalist?
Well, in some ways, I really do. I'm not sure this is the most important thing I try to do, but it's effective and it's what I'm known for. It's to give people a laugh about politics. Look, it is funny, and the people who are in it are funny. And since we're paying to put on this show, we should get some great entertainment out of it. And it is fascinating. It is ludicrous. It is the source of endless amusement and humor. I think that it's part of your right as an American citizen to laugh at the people in power.
So it's more
Good
laughter.
for them. It's good for us.
Than change, because when you had spoken earlier, you said that your goal was to try and change the world. Have you given up on that aspect?
Oh, no, not at all.
That's secondary to laughing?
Well, see, I really do believe in democracy, and I think that part of the rot of our democratic system is that people sit around and say things like, well, there's nothing I can do. Oh, they're all crooks. You know, here we are as the heirs to the most magnificent political legacy any people has ever received. Well, after 200 years later, people all over the world are willing to die for a chance to live like this. They died in South Africa. They're dying today in Myanmar. We got it for being born. These truths to be self-evident. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whenever any government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it.
Molly, tell me about how you write, the process. Is it hard for you? Is it easy? Do you need to be inspired? What goes on in terms of getting that stuff on paper?
Well, every morning I read 4 or 5 newspapers and the internet, and I also read dozens of magazines and usually a couple of books a week. Fortunately, I'm a fast reader. And so when I'm reading the papers, I find anything that makes me laugh out loud or makes me absolutely furious, I've got a column. But there are always those days when that doesn't happen and you're sitting there going, I know nothing to write about. So you go back to your files where you've been, as we say in our business, saving strings. So you can write about, you know, healthcare or some, you know, relatively dry subject that is worthy and people need to know about. And, of course, there's never anything to be found. That's the only hard part of the job those days when you've already read it.
Does that happen very often?
No.
No. You can find something in the news that will get you going.
I do.
Yeah.
So, you know, politics, how wonderful. It droppeth as a gentle rain from heaven. There is no shortage of material.
Yeah.
I mean, the comedic possibilities of this system are just endless.
There are very few people that I think take that particular approach to politics, where essentially they find it a great comic drama. But I think that that's your unique ability to make us see that.
Well, I've seen, you know, I see the tragic side of it, but let's face it, the funny parts of it are really much better.
Yeah, they're more enjoyable to read.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, when you get people to laugh about something, it sort of clears away their prejudices and whatever else is on their mind. And it's the reason preachers always tell those terrible jokes at the beginning of a sermon. Now, there is nothing lamer than preacher humor. But if they can, the congregation always politely goes, ha, ha, ha. They're relaxed and then they're more open to listening to the sermon. Which, what I'm trying to do is give them information about what the elected officials are doing that is going to affect their lives. I always think that everything, you know, we used to write these sort of dry, dull, formulaic stories. House Bill 327 was passed out of the subcommittee by a unanimous vote on Tuesday. This tells you absolutely nothing about what happened and what it means to you. I feel like about half the stories that come out of the state legislature should begin, "You're getting screwed again."
Well, it's really been a delight, Molly Ivins, to speak with you today. And thank you for joining us on the Drexel interview.